So welcome to week 6, where our topic is modesty. Modesty in fashion, Steph. I know what modesty is, well, I think I know what modesty is. To me, it means something that's understated, that is holding oneself back slightly, is not putting oneself on display. Is there something that you think of in fashion with modesty?
I'm reminded I used to always tell my father when I was a child, if you say you're modest, that means you're immodest.
Ah, so it's something that's almost unspoken.
I think modesty means different things for different people. And when we talk about it related to clothes, I think everybody's minds immediately go to what we reveal and what we cover. This can relate to the body as well as internally what we are revealing and what we are exposing. And I think that it's something that's very personal.
Right, and it also depends culturally where we are, chronologically where we are in terms of the historical moment. So we've decided this week to break things up into areas of the body. So we're going to start with the head and the neck. One of the works that we'll look at is the turtleneck, and so something that really had its moment. Well, it's had many moments, actually. I think you can go through the whole of the last century and pick out many different figures in the public eye, but also very quotidian examples of the turtleneck. Had a moment in the 1920s, definitely a moment in the 50s, sort of the stereotype of the beatnik in many ways, a very kind of fashion constructed stereotype. In the 60s as well. Absolutely, activism. We think of the Black Panthers in it too. You'll get to see Hana Tajima's reflection on the turtleneck, and she does a really interesting thing where she connects the modesty implied in the turtleneck, and she thinks about that both psychologically and physically. So what we can choose to reveal and hide based on the clothing that we share, but also the connections and connotations of that clothing. She connects the turtleneck with the hijab. So you'll get to think about those two items in tandem with one another. We'll also talk about swimwear, so specific examples.
Well, swimwear I think is a very direct example of how different bathing costumes have changed at different points in time to reveal and cover different parts of the body.
And there's definitely been a lot of controversy over the ways in which we present ourselves when we're getting into water, which seems odd actually in some cases. But for example, Speedo, a company that had produced other types of hosiery basically before the late 1920s, started to produce swimwear, and an Australian medalist was almost not able to get her medal because what she was wearing apparently was too revealing at that point in time.
So the birth of the bikini as we know it today is traced to the 1940s. It was an atomic birth, which you will learn as you get more in depth into the week. It was really seen as a risque thing for women to be revealing newer areas of the body. Two-piece bathing suits were already being worn, however the bikini lowered to reveal the navel.
And yet we still have conversations about what is okay and what's not okay to wear on the beach. And so many of you may have read headlines over the last year or two about the burkini, something that was developed in the early 2000s by a designer in Australia to allow women who wanted to cover either for religious reasons, reasons of modesty, or even just to make sure that their skin was protected from the sun. It's become a garment that has been taken up en masse, and yet in the last year and a half or so on French beaches in particular, there's been a reaction to and even edicts banning its use on the seafront.
And so it's really interesting to think you have two garments, the bikini and the burkini, that essentially do the opposite in terms of coverage, and yet they are both deemed immodest in different contexts. So the next part of the body that we're going to talk about are legs, and legs historically for women especially have been a site of conversation and controversy around issues of modesty. In the 1920s, you saw a very drastic move of the hemline to just below the knee, which now is considered fairly modest. And so this is a moment in time when the hemline conversation really first emerged, a conversation which culminated in the 1960s when the miniskirt really had its heyday.
I think culturally, politically, socially, even economically, we're able to track what we mean by modesty, both in terms of garments, but also more widely through thinking about how they fit or don't fit on women's bodies. So it's a discussion that is definitely an open-ended one and good to have.
But then modesty can also take a totally different tact, one that is more psychological. And that's where we come in with our contemporary conclusion, the surgical mask, which is one of Michelle's favorite items of the course and the exhibition.
Yeah. So the surgical mask is something developed really in the early part of the 20th century. In Japanese youth culture of the last 10, 15 years, the surgical mask has been a way to demarcate public and private space. So the wearing of it moves beyond a polite expression of making sure that you're not going to infect somebody with your cold and a fashion statement. It becomes something that is a sartorial expression of a dividing line between you and the rest of the world.
Taken as a whole, I think hopefully you'll come away with the idea that modesty really is a multivalent subject. And as Michelle just so eloquently explained about the surgical mask, it's not just necessarily about covering up your body for people's gaze. It's covering up areas of your body for other reasons as well.
Or deciding not to.
Yes.